Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second session of Nonprofit Management Institute. My name is Rebecca Beck. I'm the Education Manager here at the center. I have with me Dr. Palmer, our facilitator, Jean Tedrow, our Executive Director and CEO, and also have Leslie with us here as well. Leslie Morales is our Nonprofit Services Assistant. We're delighted to have you join us for today's session on board governance and program design, management, and evaluation. You're in for a treat. These sessions are intended to be both instruction as well as engaging and interactive with work done in the session so that you leave the session without having to do any homework. So that's why they're as long as they are, and they're intended to give you the whole breadth of the experience. Since we're not in person and we're virtual, we want you all to get as close to that as we possibly can. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jean to give our welcome, and we will continue on.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'll make sure I'm not on mute. Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with you again on this second second session of our institute. Focusing on board governance is perhaps one of the most often challenging work that we have to do as executives and emerging leaders, understanding what our role is with regard to board governance and what we can and cannot do, what we should do. Dr. Palmer, we appreciate you being here with us today to help guide this conversation. And we, as always, appreciate the Guilford Nonprofit Consortium for its support and partnership on this webinar, and for the Triangle Community Foundation for its support. For those of you who may be here for the first time, may have missed last week, our program is recorded, so please feel free to go to that and catch up. But I think that the way that we have structured this, you can just jump in, dive in, and Dr. Palmer will take us on our way. Thank you again to Rebecca and Leslie, who have been excellent in helping us to put this program forward. So with that, Rebecca or Dr. Palmer, take it away. Oh, and let me just say, I'm going to mute myself and take my video off, but I'm going to be listening in, and I'm excited for the content of this morning. So thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you. If we can back up just to that last screen, Leslie, wanted to mention that we do get support from the Triangle Community Foundation as a sponsor for this program. And our partner on this series is the Guilford Nonprofit Consortium. And several of you are with us thanks to their partnership with us. So appreciate you all being here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Palmer, to go over the agenda and kick us off. Thank you all.
Good morning, and our agenda for today is as is shown on the screen here. We will do some more introducing of ourselves, and then we will reflect a little bit on the last session, taking into account the capacity assessment results and findings. And our two main topics for today are board governance and program design, management, and evaluation. So we will follow the agenda, and there will be an evaluation at the end. And then we will get just general reflective comments from you in terms of the experience for today. So again, thank you for choosing the Nonprofit Management Institute as a part of your professional development. So we are, again, going to do some introductions. And but before we get to that, one of the things that I always like to do is just kind of check in and ask the question, what do you remember from the previous session? Is there anything that stands out for you that you recall from our previous session? And Leslie, if you could go to gallery view for me, and you can either put what you remember in the chat, and we'll share that. Or you can, I think, Rebecca, they can unmute themselves and share what they recall from last week.
Yep, don't be
And please
shy.
say, I was going to say, please say who you are. Who you are. Of course, we can see your names on the screen, but who you are in the name of your organization.
Looks like we've got some popping up in the chat. The Build, Thrive, Sustain framework, the concept of capacity and capacity building tools. Oh, here we go. How much work I need to do based on the capacity assessment. That's great. I'm sorry, Terry. It's good to see you. Sarah said, I really appreciated the Build, Thrive, Sustain framework and measurements for various aspects of a nonprofit. It's a very different lens to look at the work that you do and how you might scale up and how you might grow. So that's great. Scott, how I just overfilled my plate. Build, Thrive, Sustain. Yep. You're welcome. Sarah mentioned also that it will help her be a better board member, she hopes. So that's good. And today's session, you'll learn a lot more about that as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And is it Cheryl or Sherelle?
Sherelle.
Sherelle, I thought so. Okay. Helpful to reflect on what needs to be done within the organization due to the capacity assessment. Great tool.
Sherelle, I'm loving your hat. I'm a wear a hat to church type of gal, so I like
so
your
much.
hat.
I appreciate that.
And Giselle, eye-opening to see all the components needed to have a sustainable nonprofit. And Gerard, welcome to your first session as our second session here. And you were able to check in on the recording. That's great. Some valuable tools to help your nonprofit, especially in terms of sustainability. That's great. And then Deb, in developing a high capacity team, ask board of directors specifics. Can you tell me more about that, Deb? If you're able to unmute. I know some of you are, when we're working remote, we're not able to easily unmute and have a clear, clear volume. So feel free if you can't, no worries.
Mm-hmm.
Laura, I appreciated the comments in terms of innovation and program organization life cycles. And welcome, Watsy. We're glad to have you. That's great. Does anyone want to unmute and share anything? All right.
Okay.
We've got
All
some
right.
quiet folks today. We'll get you talking. Don't worry.
I was going to share that my board members actually went through some of the feedback we did in the capacity assessment, and it was really eye-opening for how we're going to do our strategic planning moving forward. So we all greatly appreciate it, and they wanted me to acknowledge that it was such a great tool, and we look forward to using that in our board meetings moving forward to see where we're at in our vision and scope of things. So I appreciate that.
That's great.
And Sherelle, to that point, it is a common practice in the strategic planning process to do a capacity assessment first and let that guide, you know, specifically what the what your nonprofit may have the capacity to do, right? Because if you're goal setting, you do want to know what your current level of capacity is so that we don't identify goals or choose goals that are not in our reach. So thank you for that feedback. Is that it, Rebecca? I think those are all of our reflective
I think so.
comments. Thank you all for that warm up, right? To kind of get us going and started for what we have in store for you today. Leslie, can you take me to the slide that reads capacity to building framework, just to kind of close out that reflection in terms of thinking about what we did last week. And so if you had to kind of remember these 5 components of the capacity building framework for the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits, we have 1 principles and practices guide in terms of what we're working from. And all of us were able to, review that last week. And then we have we have 12 principles. So 1 principles and practices guide, 12 principles. We have 3 management conditions, 1 guide, 12 principles, 3 management conditions. And then we have actually 2 levels of assessing capacity. The first level is the basic level of, remember we identified where we were, build, thrive, sustain across the primary practice, right, for each principle. And then we also went a step further by way of SurveyMonkey. You indicated what practices you want to work on within the next year. And so that's kind of the level 2 of assessing capacity. So we have 2 levels of that. So 1 guide, 12 principles, 3 frames for identifying our management condition, 2 ways of looking at capacity or assessing it. And can anyone guess how many practices we have total across all 12 principles? Anybody want to just take a guess? You can put it in the chat if you like. We have 12 principles, and how many practices do you think? Okay. I see. I think I saw 100 there, Rebecca.
Yep.
Yeah.
360 is our top guess right now from Plumist.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So for the record, we have 216 practices. 216 how to engage or how to do capacity building or what we should focus on. We're going to be focusing on 125 of those 216 because we're focusing on 6 of the 12 principles. So 1 guide, 12 principles, 3 frames for identifying where we are in terms of our management condition, 2 ways of looking at and assessing capacity, and 216 total practices. And we're going to study 125 of those. I'm seeing a little bit of reaction from Sarah in the chat on that. So, so that was just a little bit of trivia, right, about the capacity building framework for the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. So we're going to, you see that reaction, Rebecca? So we're going to do some formal introductions here. And so Leslie, if you could take us back to the gallery view and thinking about our state, the state of North Carolina. So there was 100 counties, right? And all of you shared with us last week by using the annotate function on the map in terms of where you are. So today, what we would like for you to do, either using the chat or you can unmute yourself, is to share with us something that's unique about the city that you're in or the county that you're in. Something unique about your city or your county. And I think for all practical purposes, I can see everyone's name, right, Rebecca? I think everybody's name is showing up. So we can see your name. So if you could share with us in your intro, the city and county that you're in, and then something unique about where you are. I see some comments already popping up in the chat, Rebecca.
Yep. And Julie's getting us off to a great start with tobacco, donuts, and underwear, of all things.
And where
Yeah,
is that?
Where are you, Julie?
Winston-Salem,
All
Oh,
right.
Winston-Salem,
Yeah.
Krispy Kreme, and Haynes.
Okay.
That's great.
Yes.
Giselle, a furniture market. I know that. I know which one you're talking about. Asheville, craft breweries. Yay. Salisbury, Rowan County, birthplace of Cheerwine, one of my favorites, and Food Lion.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Andy and
beach.
Boone. Yep, the mountains. Wonderful. Anna,
Fantastic.
number 11 in
Uh-huh.
U.S. News and World Report's best places to live.
Greensboro 4.
They're coming in quick. This is great.
They are
Watsy.
coming in quick.
Yeah, Watsy. Education, agriculture, medicine, and water in Greenville, Washington. Terry, fastest growing city, I think.
Who was that from Lexington, Davidson County? I thought I saw that pop up.
Oh, I just saw. Raise her hand,
Hey,
Laura.
just anyway.
Good morning.
Hey, Laura. I grew up in Lexington, Laura.
Wonderful. Okay, great to know.
Mhm.
Great. These are all really good.
I see Apex. I lived in Apex for a little bit years ago. Okay. All right.
Yeah, what's great about this is that you do kind of learn some fun trivia about different places in our state.
For sure.
Scott, Garner, not a place for foodies. Anyone else in Garner want to challenge that?
Oh, gosh.
Oh. And
Well,
you all,
we are all proud to be in North Carolina, right?
yes.
Lots to be, lots of shout outs and a lot to be proud of all over the state. And the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits recognizes that and we promote ourselves as having, as being able to serve the state in that regard. So 100 missions, I think is how we phrase it. And we are definitely so glad that you all, again, that you're here with us. So thank you for those introductions, and thank you for helping us learn more about the state of North Carolina. That was great. Thank you. So as we move on in our agenda, we were able to share with you your individual results and findings or results from your assessment. And so what we wanted to do is just take a minute to kind of just have you share with us your initial just kind of feedback or initial response to what it is that you were able to learn from those. So we're going to do this audibly, so you can unmute yourselves and share what your thoughts, if anything at all, that you were able to glean from those results, and then we will look at the bigger report, the corporate report, report, Rebecca, after they give those. So your individual responses or thoughts about that, what you were able to get back.
Hi, this is Monica out in Franklin County. Good morning, everybody. One of my takeaways was how well the organization does depends highly on how effective the board of directors is. And I realized through the assessment that a lot of work needs to be done around board development in terms of job descriptions, responsibilities. I mean, it's on paper. However, there needs to be more consistency on carrying out those roles and duties. Right, and I really was very self-reflective in how sometimes it feels like I lead the board versus them leading and offering a resource to me. So I just kind of looked at it from an organizational structure perspective and said, okay, we as Safe Space can only be as effective as our leaders are. And I can't develop and build myself if my board is not on that same trajectory as well. So that was one of my takeaways.
This is Rosalind Fulton here in Greensboro, Guilford County.
Is there anyone else, Monica?
I think Dr. Palmer, we had a little delay, sorry, on your video there, or your sound as well.
Okay. Okay, all right, we'll work through this. If something happens and I disappear, I will be back.
Thanks for sharing, Monica. That's great.
I thought I heard someone else trying to share. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was Rosalind or Rosalind.
It's Rosalind with, can you hear me? I'm sorry, I think I'm having computer
Yeah,
issues.
yes.
Okay. I'll kind of piggyback off of Monica about board development. You know, when I first been with the organization for a very long time, but when I became the executive director, the board chair that we had coming in, there were times where I felt like she wanted to be the executive director and I was supposed to be her assistant. And that was, you know, work through some of those issues, still working through some of those issues, but also that realizing that my board is supposed to be helping this organization, not that I only talk to them once a month. And we're still trying to get through that where, you know, they feel like it's just come to a board meeting, hear about what's going on. Okay, tell me about what's going on next month. So.
Yeah, my name is Gerard Truesdale. I'm from Greensboro. What I learned from my assessment was that my nonprofit is at a point of growth right now where we're having to hire employees and getting going with that. So knowing that, you know, the importance of the employee handbook with policies and, you know, understanding employee personnel and, you know, volunteer status and differentiating that and even setting it up in the first place is something that I believe is was very helpful to see and helps kind of put us in the right direction of where we need to go to accomplish that goal. So we appreciate that.
Is there anyone else that has any feedback? And of course, our topic today is board governance, one of the topics. But are there any other thoughts about what you were able to glean from your report, or how you've already begun to use that information? I know Sherelle shared with us how she is using that within a week's time, right? So are there any other comments about that before we look at the group report?
This is Giselle Mancy from the Latino Family Center. I think for me, I've been raving about the first session to everybody. I'm brand new to the nonprofit world. I came out of the education world. And so, you know, I thought I was jumping into another industry for something similar. Nonprofit is a whole different ballgame. I don't care what anybody says. And so I say through and through, I'm like, nonprofit and education they're similar, but they're two different ballgames. It's football and baseball almost. But to me, it has been very helpful to see the different areas where perhaps, and you know, and I don't consider myself like the master be all, but it was really good to nitpick and see the areas that I need to learn more about or things that perhaps like, I mean, because, you know, we're under the YWCA, so a lot of it is already in place. But looking in my tenure in the future, where I want to lead the organization or my department, and not only that, but all the tools that come with it. Obviously, I know somebody said my plate is full. Yes, my plate got like overrun, but I'm trying to focus on like the top 3, if you will, and trying to not get overwhelmed in everything that I have to do. But it has put me into action. It propelled me forward to say, okay, I need more information about this, or I want to focus on that, or reaching out to the areas or the people that I need to get specific information. So it has been very eye-opening and super helpful to even leverage like where I want to focus in the next few months, years, you know, looking at short-term and long-term goals. So I'm raving about you guys.
Thank you. Thank you for your feedback, and thank you for the promotion. Thanks. Anybody else? One more, maybe, before we look at the group results. Okay, Rebecca, so we will move to the group results. You want to share with us how they can access that?
Yes, so I popped them in the chat, and sometimes I've had trouble with PDFs, people being able to open them in the chat. So if you can give me a thumbs up if you're able to access that file. Oh, we got a thumbs up. Yay. Okay, that's good. I think I did it right this time.
Great.
And then Leslie, do you have that file open, or would you like me to share my screen? Oh, she's ready.
Okay.
She's always on top.
Awesome.
Nice job, Leslie.
Great. So what we did is we compiled the results from each of your organizations, and we categorized them by the 6 principles that we're going to focus on. So we're going to kind of scroll through this. And as you're looking at this, think about it. Some of you have already done this, but think about it in this context, that you could do like a 360 feedback type of approach and have different stakeholders complete the assessment in terms of what they think you need to work on. And you can compile this and share this. And also remember, we did have this uploaded in SurveyMonkey. So that is a resource that some of you may already have an account with. And so you can use that in that way as well. So in terms of board governance, and I think, Rebecca, you shared with me that it was 43 out of 46 participants that completed it. So we're looking at the majority, significantly over the majority of us who completed the assessment. So in terms of under the build category, most of us indicated that the provide board members a clear job description, orientation, and ongoing training, that was what we wanted to focus on in the next year. So that's important for us to know as we're working through the Institute. And then under Thrive, the majority of us, not by much, the first and second practice under Thrive are competing with each other there a little bit, but want to work on this particular item about expectations of board members to volunteer their time and raise money and to make a contribution as well. And then also focusing on the demographics and characteristics of the board, meaning the composition of the board. So those are the 2 in terms of a group. And then under Sustain, the focus was ensuring that the board of directors is receptive to and embraces a learning culture, an inclusive culture, and being more deliberate about culture, and then definitely focusing on ideas and diverse ideas and encouraging diverse ideas as it relates to your organization as a whole. So as a group, this is where the focus appears to be in terms of what you all want to focus on. So we'll try to we will try to hone in on these as we go through our work together. The next principle was program design, management, and evaluation. Majority of us said that we wanted to consult with our partners to determine the need for programs and services under Build, and then under Thrive to evaluate our programs to assess outcome achievement and community impact. And then for Sustain, we want to continue our programs in a way that the program work matches the mission and vision, and that we are meeting the needs of the people in the community, and we are addressing our community needs and our community or social conditions or problems. So those were the 3 areas of focus for program design, management, and evaluation. And then our next principle is strategic planning. And so the focus here is that we document our success and lessons learned under Build, and that we analyze the strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats. And some of us are familiar with the SWOT analysis. If you're not, we will be covering that next week in the strategic planning session. But there was a need to want to focus on that within the year across all of you. And then to incorporate equity indicators in our strategic plans. So that was that principle. And then the next principle is financial management. And here, the focus is to have a strategy for establishing reserves. Boy, that would be great, wouldn't it? If we could all do that. That's a heavy lift for some of us in terms of our nonprofit's capacity, but being strategic and working towards it, it can happen. Then under Thrive, to initiate strategies to diversify our sources of revenue, and under Sustain, identify and implement new revenue generating strategies. And we'll talk about most of, if not all of that in the financial management session that we do. We will, the way that we have this designed, fundraising and financial management is week after next. And we put those 2 together because they align. And when we are managing our nonprofits, it's important to understand that those are not separate, that they should be working in tandem. And when we are managing our finances, we obviously should be taking into consideration how fundraising is going. So that's how we train on that topic. And then the next topic or principle for us is fundraising. Under Build, our focus was, we want to focus on informing our donors of what it is that we're doing. So our activities, our programs, our services. And under Thrive, a significant number of us said that we want to analyze the race, gender, and socioeconomic background of our donors. And we want to pay attention to that and recognize unconscious biases in terms of when we're reaching out and engaging in fundraising. So that was top of our list for that particular area. Under Sustain, consider new income sources through social entrepreneurship and earn revenue. And then I'll go ahead and include the next one since it's so close in terms of what we want to work on. Leverage contributed dollars with matching gifts from individuals, foundations, or businesses. So that's the fundraising principle. And then the 6th one is human resources. So the focus here is to provide staff and volunteers with clear job descriptions and the tools that they need to do their work. And then also focusing on creating volunteer and staff opportunities that accommodate a variety of voices, perspectives, and physical abilities. Under Thrive, it was to employ personnel and volunteers who reflect the diversity of the community. And then what led the pack under Sustain is to create and implement a board-approved succession policy. I will note, and succession plan, there is a resource that you can access by way of the NC Center website. There's one article about succession planning, and then there is a report titled Countdown to the Inevitable. That's another report that speaks to succession planning and the transition of executive directors and president and CEOs in the state of North Carolina. I can't remember the total numbers, either 400 or 600 maybe individuals that completed a survey to give insight as to what is happening in terms of who will be leaving their president and CEO or executive director roles across the state. So, so that's a resource that is out there that might actually help to give insight as you all are making decisions about succession planning. So that is the results and findings from our kind of corporate pulling it all together assessment results and findings. And if we could go back to gallery view, are there, I'd like to kind of hear your thoughts about the picture that we have painted as a cohort in terms of what we want to focus on moving forward. And you can use the chat or yeah, go ahead, Scott. Go ahead.
It's good information, but I was bouncing back and forth between my answers and the group's answers to see where we match and where we don't match. And being a processor, I kind of need time to mull everything over.
For sure. That is, you know, we're going to use this to guide our focus in terms of my facilitation of the sessions pertaining to each of these topics. And boy, could you imagine if we did all 12, you know, in terms of thinking about that. So Scott, they're wanting you to repeat your comment. They couldn't hear you. So.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's very quiet. I think I can fill in based on what I heard. For you, it sounds like comparing the full results and comparing it to your individual results takes some processing time on your part to really sort of absorb it and see where there was overlap and where there wasn't. Was that pretty much it? Yeah. Okay.
Any other thoughts about what we were able to see collectively?
There was a request for our work on the executive succession, and I popped that in the chat there for those of you that want to explore that a little bit more. Yep.
Okay. And I did see an email, Rebecca. Some would like us to email the results and findings report. Okay.
Yep, I can do that. We'll do that in the wraparound.
Okay. Okay. All right. Okay, well, it's time to get going, right? It's time for us to jump into our content. We of course are going to cover 2 topics today. Now, I hope you picked up on from last week that this is hands-on. So we complete our work. Rebecca mentioned this in her intro. We complete our work in real time. So we are working together while we are sharing the content. We're also wanting us to know how to use what it is that we have, what we've shown in the Principles and Practices Guide. So we are going to take, Rebecca, and Leslie, we're going to take about a 3 to 5 minute little break, right, before we jump into the content. And what I want you to do while you're on break is I want you to find or bring back with you maybe about 5 pieces of plain paper, if you would. So while you're on your break, if you could do that. And then for those of you who might want to be a little creative, and I'm only giving you just a little hint as to what we're going to be doing, but for those of you who might want to be a little bit creative and more colorful, if you have colored markers or you have colored pencils, or you can just use your regular old pencil and pen when you come back. If you would bring those tools back with you, that would be great. So Rebecca, we're going to take maybe a 5-minute little stretch, little break to kind of bridge our way back into our work. Does that sound okay for everyone? Okay.
Great. Excellent. So we'll be back here about 10:16.
Perfect.
All right.
Perfect.
Thanks
Perfect.
all. I'm going to pause the recording.
Okay. Topic is board governance. And the way we want to kind of move into this topic is to start with how one might see or define what a board of directors is, and or what a board member is, or how we might characterize a board member. So I asked you to bring back with you a few sheets of paper. So if you could just kind of draw a line down the center of that paper, let's say if it's horizontal, or if you prefer the other way, that's fine. So it could be portrait or landscape, however you want to divide your page, and divide that into 2 sections. Label the left side board of directors and label the right side board members, or board member, I'm sorry. On the left side, what I would like for you to write for me are the different ways in which you view a board of directors. So words, phrases, just create that laundry list of, how do you view, or how do you see, or what do you see, or what do you think about when you think about a board of directors of a nonprofit? What comes to mind for you? So we're starting with the board of directors first. So what comes to mind for you when you hear that, or when you think about a board of directors for a nonprofit? And then once you have a few items listed, would you also do the same on the right side of your sheet? So when you hear or think about a board member, how would you characterize a board member of a board of directors of a nonprofit? And so our instructions are to utilize a piece of the paper that I asked you to bring back with you, divide it in half, label one side board of directors, the other side board members, and then indicate how when you hear the words board of directors, or when you think about a board of directors for a nonprofit, what comes to mind? So you're listing words, phrases, and the like. And then on the other side, you're doing the same for how you might view a board member. And so we're going to start with the board of directors. You can either use the chat, or you can do this audibly. So you can unmute yourself if you'd like. Let's start with board of directors. Just kind of give me some shout outs of what it is you wrote in terms of when you think about a board of directors. I see fundraising, I see direction. I'm looking at the chat now, but you can unmute yourself and I'll just stop talking and you can have at it.
I'll go. Fiscal oversight.
Okay, yes. Money, 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 and more money, right?
Leadership.
Yes.
Mission and result focused.
Okay.
Support.
Okay.
Expertise.
Okay. That's political capital in the chat. I'm just kind of reading what pops up on my end. So board of directors, yes. What about board member? What comes to mind when you think about a board member, or you in terms of characterizing a board member of a board of directors of a nonprofit?
Known leaders.
Was that no leaders, N-O?
Known, like known in the community. Like name recognition.
Oh, known. Okay, gotcha. Thank you. Okay. 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 So in your packet, in your packet of handouts, there is a handout titled Board of Directors, and there's also a definition there for board member or description. And so we know that boards of directors are unique and different from nonprofit to nonprofit. You know, boards have their own culture, they have their own personality collectively. And then, of course, we have these individual board members that make up the board, and the composition of our boards are typically determined early on in the establishment of a nonprofit. It can change over time. Some of your nonprofits are mandated, right, to have certain types of skills and expertise on the board, and you may or may not have a lot of control over the what type of board member, but the actual board member, the person that is recruited, you do obviously have some influence there. So this idea of what a board is, as opposed to what the individual board members are, who the individual board members are. What I often get from executive directors is, I want my board to be more active. You know, I want my board to be more engaged. And for those of you who have an active, engaged board, you know that that takes time, that it is not a culture that is fostered overnight, that it takes, for those of us who are in those roles, leading nonprofits in terms of leading and managing a nonprofit as the ED or president and CEO, we know that it takes time to cultivate a board to be as active and as engaged as you need them to be. You have to build in mechanisms for that development. And as the person that's in the executive director role, that aligns with what our responsibilities are. So to kind of help and support those board members to become and enhance their capacity as individuals, but also as a collective. And sometimes it's a little easier in some organizations or nonprofits than others. But it should be a goal if in fact that is what your desire is, and if it's helpful for your nonprofit to be able to do all the things that you've committed to by way of your mission and vision. So I heard when we were talking in general about just boards and them being engaged, when I was looking at your comments and looking at the way you described them, most of us want our boards to be actively engaged. I mean, that because it is a necessity in order for us to fundraise, number one, we know that, but also in terms of implementing the programs that we offer. So that's important for us to think about. So again, you have from us a definition of both. Keep in mind that those definitions should be tweaked to define your own board of directors and to describe, the culture of the board members that you've brought together. Are there any questions about we're going to go deeper, but just initially, are there any kind of questions that you have about this idea of the board of directors as one unit, one team, one body, as compared to a board member who serves on said board? Any questions about that?
You have, are you going to talk about sizes of the board?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So we will talk about composition of the board, and size is a part of that. Okay. So I have a polling question for you, and Rebecca is going to manage the poll. the question I have for you, this is yes or no. And then Rebecca give you instructions on how to participate in the poll. The question is, have you ever, have you served on a board? And the pointed question is, do you currently serve on a board or have you in the past? And so, Rebecca, I will let you take it away.
Sure thing. Folks are already responding. We are pull up here. And great. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end and show the results. So we have about 52% you currently serve on a board. 20% of you have done so in the past, and 27% have not served on a board before.
Okay, so a significant number of us have had some experience serving on a board. So that at least gives us a practice perspective of what that means. And what I would like to pose to the group as you're learning and trying to increase the capacity of your board is to think about your role currently on a board, or when you've served on a board, for those of you who have, you know, what was it that you needed in order for you to be active? You know, what was it that you needed? And then what were some barriers that kept you from being as active as you'd like to be? Because that holds true for your existing board members. You know, so what is it that would have helped you to be more engaged and more active? And then what were barriers that kind of hindered you from being more active? I think sometimes we make the assumption, especially if we're struggling with having an active board, we make the assumption that our board members just don't want to be involved, or they just, you know, they just want to come to the meetings and that's it. And there are some where that is the case, right? We know that there are times when individuals join boards for selfish reasons, you know, that they're wanting to maybe have that on their resume. You know, this is just real truth, right? Or there's some other reason why they're serving. That is true. But I would venture to say that the majority of us that serve on a board, that we really do care about the mission and the cause of the organization, and we want to be as involved and helpful as we can. And so sometimes I just say, step back and pose those two questions. What kept you or keeps you from being more active? And at the same time, you know, what would have helped you, or what would help you be more active? One practice I think is critical is just ask me as your board member to do something specific that you know I know how to do. That's an easy yes when I already know how to do what you're asking, as opposed to me having to be brought up to speed or trained. And that's not to say that those are off limits, but that is a way to begin to have your board to be more active. So this idea of having a more active board, I'm going to pause there just to see if there are any comments about what I've shared so far.
I'll jump in and say, oh, I don't have my camera on, sorry. I've tried that with giving them specific tasks. We created committees on our board, and committees work on, you know, certain projects. Sometimes it feels like I'm babysitting though. I'm constantly having to send reminders of, you know, I need you to do this, don't forget to do this, because there's not a lot of, I'm not gonna say communication from their point, but it's sometimes, and I know everyone has busy lives, but sometimes it's like I'm constantly having to babysit my board and babysit board members.
I apologize.
There are.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jane.
Okay,
you were going to say, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. There I was talking a minute ago and I was on mute. I'm so sorry. I inherited a very large board when I took my role. I have 40 board members, and I think I need to almost start from, I need to go back to some board member 101 type, type training, because quite frankly, I do have board members that I never see, I never hear from. And in asking them to do something specific, some of them, I don't even know what their skills are, because again, it's such a big board. And so being able to say, okay, I need for you to do this, whereas I may not know if that's their skill set. So is there a type of, I have developed, in my first year, I developed a kind of a reciprocal agreement for board members to sign, and it, it clearly states that they will support us financially, whatever, and there's no set amount. But is there a questionnaire or a survey that you all have that is something that we could send to our board members to kind of understand where their passions lie, other than the broad picture? But maybe if they're really good at, I don't know, marketing, maybe I could pull them in on a committee for that. So being able to really discern what their skill set and level is could be helpful to me.
So yes, there are tools where we develop board profiles, and we can, pose like a single sheet, pose a series of questions that helps you to gain more insight as to what their skills are and what they have to offer, et cetera. And you could also include in that barriers to, say a high level of engagement. And then that way you have it on file. You can do this every year, by the way. And with SurveyMonkey and electronic tools like that, you can send it out. One thing that I found that works when you do something like that is do it at the board meeting. So like if it's a quick survey or you want them to complete a profile, then they can pop it up on their phone. They can sit right there, make it real simple, click, 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 click. I have this skill, maybe have, I don't know, 6 or 7 questions on there. And I will do a little bit of going back into my library, Jane, and I'll provide that for us to send out in the wraparound. So I'll make a note of that. But yes, you can, there are profile templates and forms that you can use to identify all of those things. You have them on file. You can do it every year, just like you do the conflict of interest policy and all that other stuff that they sign. You can do that at that time. So yes, back to Rosalind's comment about her board. What I'm going to say to Rosalind is stop babysitting. And we're in a safe space here, right? Aren't we in a safe space? Yes. Stop babysitting and leave them. And when they realize they're being left behind, if they really want to be a part of what you're doing, they'll start to catch up. That's something that I've tried over the years. Now, I say that at the same time, I recognize that we're all trying to maintain a certain number of board members, right? We have it in our bylaws, how many board members we're supposed to have. And, we don't want to lose anybody. We want to keep, all the board members we have. But one of the things that I will say to you, and only you can make this decision being in the executive director role that you're in, you know your culture, you know the essence of where you are. So I can't speak to that. But what I will say is that, whenever you find that your board members may or may not be necessarily providing what you need, you have to make a hard decision, right? And that is sometimes you might lose some board members. Yes, it's in the bylaws as to what your minimum number is, but there's also this thing called being a vacant position. Positions can be vacant, not forever, but they can be vacant long enough for you to find a good match. So, that is, we have to help our board members be responsible for themselves. And then we can benefit from that change in their being responsible. And I know there's probably some more, Rosalind, to the story, because I've been doing this a long time. So I know there's more to your story. But just in general, when I hear that, the first thing I want to say is stop babysitting. We're all adults. Put your expectations out there. They agree or don't agree, but just kind of keep it moving. You know, just continue with the committee meeting, continue with the board meeting. If you have one, you just continue. And if they really want to be a part of that and they are concerned about being a part, they'll start to realize, oh my gosh, they're leaving me. You know, I gotta stay caught up. So we can talk offline if you need to. But I do recognize that there's typically more to the story, but that is kind of my initial response. And I'll stop talking so much and hear from anybody else with where we are right now. And then I'm going to move on because I know our time is ticking away, but I don't want to move too quickly without trying to respond to questions. I think Terry has a, yes.
The approach you just spoke about, I get the impression that Rosalind's board might be a little bit more mature than mine. I have 99% brand new board members, and some of them are first-time board members ever. Would you suggest that same approach with this type of board versus a board that maybe has been longer standing?
I would probably pepper in there kind of some one-on-ones with your brand new ones, because just inquiring with them, I don't know how many board members you have, but inquiring with them about what their needs might be on an individual level so that they recognize that you're there for them and that you are a resource, not a babysitter, but a resource. And that if they have questions or if there's something hindering them from being engaged, you're starting to pick up on that early. So I would just kind of, you know, bring a little bit of that into the dynamic so that they recognize that you're there to help them be engaged.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't want to leave anyone out, but I'm going to move on to,
I did have one sort of, so when it comes to like the CEO and the board, like I've heard some people say, oh, the board is the boss of the CEO, but then we're talking about, you know, the CEO having these one-on-ones and helping to coach new board members. So I was wondering if you could paint just kind of a little bit of a picture as far as ideally how this relationship is working.
Okay, so Rebecca, I don't know if Leslie's still here or not. I'm gonna move around a little bit with our handouts, okay, because we do speak to Julie's point. So in your handouts, you have a handout titled, let me get back over here to my, you have a board of directors versus the executive director handout, and you have a board chair versus executive director responsibilities handout. You have both of those. And what we try to do here is do a compare and contrast on what that dynamic should look like. So let's go to that if you all would, and then I'll make sure that we incorporate. I like to speak to what it is your questions are. So so we've got the board of directors versus the executive director. And of course, we hear this governance and oversight for the board of directors. That is what the board of directors does. The board of directors, unless there isn't an executive director, the board of directors provide governance and oversight. The executive director is responsible for day-to-day operations. I mean, that's kind of the cut and dry. And oftentimes we will run into scenarios where the board of directors has been doing everything prior to bringing on the first executive director, let's say. Or let's say the executive director leaves and the board of directors is left to run the organization. Sometimes that transition is difficult in the sense that they've been running the organization for so long and they haven't necessarily transition out of that mode. And so you may find that the board still operates that way. But we have to keep reminding them that the executive director is responsible for day-to-day operations and the board is responsible for the governance and oversight kind of global picture of what is happening in that organization. You also have a handout that is titled Board Chair versus Executive Director. And I want to hone in on this because we could very easily change this word board chair to board members. You could switch it and it would ultimately mean the same. So the board chair or the board, they help to supervise and to work together as a body to do the work of the board. And of course, the chair leads the pack in that regard. And the executive director manages the day-to-day operations. As an executive director, be familiar with your bylaws. Be familiar with how the organization was set up to operate. Now that gives you a baseline. It doesn't give you detail. It gives you a baseline as to how this particular nonprofit is supposed to function. You might also encourage your board, if it's not already in your bylaws, you might encourage your board to add to the bylaws their expectations and their way of thinking about how the executive director job and position should function. Because what I'm finding in a lot of bylaws is that it's not there. We talk about how the board is set up. We talk about the committees and all of that. But what I'm encouraging nonprofits to do is to add that piece to your bylaws if it doesn't exist. And then for that executive director, you can always go back to that to say, okay, this is what my responsibilities are. So that's one way to address that and one way to look at that. That is something that we run into quite a bit, you know, this misunderstanding of this dynamic. It should be a partnership. It should be a partnership. And this idea that the board tells the executive director what to do, I think that minimizes the role of the executive director when we speak like that. You know, that is not the intent. The intent of the board is to look after the interest of the mission and the vision of that nonprofit and its promise to its community. That's what the board does. And it's the executive director that manages and leads all of the different activities, events, staff, all of those things to help them to be able to do that. So you're working in partnership. It's not it's not a one before the other. Now, in terms of looking at it in terms of an org chart, could we go there, Rebecca or Leslie? I know we're moving around a bit, but I just want to kind of go with the flow of where everybody is. If we could go to the org chart.
Yeah, while Leslie's bringing that up, we did have a hand raised from Nicole.
Okay.
Nicole, did you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, thank you. I also wanted to mention that oftentimes, in my experience, is that the executive director selects the board members. And so in effect, you are selecting people who are supposed to do this visioning and to support you. And so if you have an executive director who wants everyone to agree with them all the time and not, disagree, and to have some tension where we get us to some change, or then you can have a problem where the staff may want to do something or see some changes, but you have essentially the ED picking the people if you're someone who doesn't want to be encouraged to do something. So I think that's a tension with nonprofit work as well.
Yes, Nicole, you are exactly right. This process of identifying board members is shared. The responsibility of that. It is the responsibility of the executive director to bring individuals forth as potential candidates to serve on the board. As we know, the board of directors oftentimes has a nominating committee, or there's some procedural way in which they invite people to become a part of the board. as an executive director, you are a part of the management team, right? You lead the management of that organization. It is our responsibility to share with our board when we have concern about who is being nominated. And oftentimes what we will do is we'll just let it happen. We won't necessarily insert our perspective, but that's a part of what our responsibility is in terms of managing the day-to-day operations. The dynamics of our board and the people that serve on it directly impact our ability to be able to do our work every day. And so it behooves us to really walk in that leadership management posture of being the person who's responsible for those day-to-day operations, and to express when you have concern about a particular nominee in terms of being on the board. Those are hard conversations to have, and often those are challenging conversations to start. But if you are in that executive director role, you owe it to yourself. You owe it to yourself to be a part of that dialogue, that recruitment process, and those exchanges that happen in terms of bringing people onto the board. So what we have here is we have an image of the structure of a nonprofit organization. And so the board of directors is typically in the driver's seat, so to speak, in terms of ensuring that the organization exists. Now this varies. This is a linear view. This is a hierarchical view, but we know that the dynamics of all of these different stakeholder entities in this picture, we know that it changes. It can change in a nanosecond. So the board of directors, when a nonprofit is started, it starts with a board of directors and what we call an originator of that nonprofit. But in order for a nonprofit to be one, there has to be a board in place. And then what we do in our bylaws is we map out the essence of that board and the different committees that are to be a part of that structure. And we incorporate the executive director function. And then of course, you've got the nonprofit staff and you've got volunteers. Now we could continue to build this out with other pieces, but these are the fundamentals. So this is the fundamental kind of infrastructure in terms of thinking about the nonprofit organization. There are occasions where, as we know, where you have an individual that starts a nonprofit, they become the executive director, right? And we see where that individual, because they started the nonprofit, be it direct or indirect, emerges kind of as the person who is in control, let's just say. And sometimes it's difficult for that founder to make that transition and to help to work in this frame. I know that that is true, but this is where we want to get to. We want to get to where the board of directors is governing and providing oversight, and that those committees are functioning. And then that executive director is working as the liaison between the day-to-day operations staff, volunteers, et cetera, and the governing and oversight body, which is the board of directors. Any questions about this image? Okay.
I actually do. This is
Okay.
Cheryl Ann. We also have an advisory committee as part, and help me kind of understand how an advisory, it's much bigger, they don't really look at the finances and so forth, but they advise us on programming and some of our direction, strategic direction. So help me understand how that would fit into your diagram here.
So it could be that your advisory panel or committee is kind of, bear with my drawing here, but if you could just kind of imagine that that advisory is kind of off the side of that board, and of the board of directors.
And so does that board of directors speak, report to, I mean, the advisory board report to the board of directors or the executive director? Because ours right now kind of reports to the executive director.
So it varies. I mean, it just depends on the structure. Let me just say this, there's no one way to do this, but oftentimes that advisory group is a group of individuals who have supported and can offer advice on unique and different elements of how that nonprofit functions. I didn't finish my box there, but I think you all kind of get the gist of it. But that advisory panel or council can be positioned as your organization sees fit. But in general, it really serves as another resource to help in the decision-making of that nonprofit. Now, what it creates for the executive director is it creates another dynamic that you've got to manage. And you've got to help those two entities, and in some cases remind often what their role is. You know, what is their purpose? Now, I don't know if the purpose of your advisory council or panel is spelled out in your bylaws or not, but they should operate within the purpose for which they were established. I know there are some nonprofits that are chartered organizations, meaning there are multiple organizations like it in different places, whereby they may say you have to have an advisory panel or council as well as you have to have your board, but they should have a specific purpose. And when you're managing that, you should be managing that entity for the purpose in which it was established. Does that help? Does that help?
So Dr. Palmer, this is Giselle speaking. I'm going to jump in real quick. So for an advisory board, should they take on the same, sorry, I'm taking a bunch of notes. Should they take the same kind of, I don't know, like, I don't know what I'm trying to say. So compared to like so you have your board of directors and then you have like your different committees or your board members, should they take a similar role as if they were like kind of like a separate but together board member, if you will? Am I even making sense?
Yeah, so, and I know you're at a YWCA, right? You're at a YWCA. So
Correct.
YWCAs have advisory panels or councils. There is a purpose for that. I would go back for the purpose. What is the purpose of the advisory council or panel? I can't tell you what the purpose is for your organization, but if you're going to have this entity as another element of governance and oversight, which is really where they fit, that's the space they're in, then you have to identify what their purpose is and utilize them for that purpose. What I would caution is having an advisory council and a board that's functioning in essence the same. And so now you're reporting to two boards, if you will. Typically advisory panels are for the purpose of seeking them out when you're trying to make some really high level decisions about the nonprofit organization. Oftentimes the advisory panel too are significant donors. You know, they may be, or stakeholders, or they really support your cause. So they're not there to be in a board meeting every month or to be on a committee. You may only meet with them once a year or as needed or twice a year, but it's not required for you to have an advisory panel or council. It is required by the IRS for you to have a board of directors. So if you have an advisory panel or council, that's your choice. That's something that you've decided to do, and you have to determine what the purpose is going to be for that body of individuals.
Dr. Palmer?
Yes.
And I think there's somebody else here I heard from last time, or we heard from, that is also from a family foundation, which is where I am from. So I have the president, CEO, and vice president of the foundation who also sit on the board, would you add a box going up that has the president, CEO, and vice president of the foundation above that?
If that is your structure, like I said before, there is no one org structure in terms of how the organization is managed. If those positions, let's take faces, if we take the faces off, what is the purpose of those positions? Whenever you're developing an org chart, the positioning of the different roles is based on what the purpose is that you've established said position. So where you put them on the org chart should be an illustration of that.
Okay.
Okay. So,
Yeah,
you know, if you're creating an org, yeah.
I'm going to have to go back to the bylaws and dig deeper on that.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Exactly. And Terry, that is where you start. You go back to the bylaws because the bylaws had to be developed in order for your nonprofit to be a nonprofit. And in those bylaws, it gives us the essence of how the board is supposed to function.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you.
Yes. The purpose for an advisory board, again, as I mentioned before, it could be multiple. You know, it just depends on what it is that you desire them to do. Some nonprofits will have an advisory board with, let's just say, some of their key donors, like significant givers, because they want them to be in the loop and they want them to be informed, but they don't necessarily desire to be a part of the board, but they will serve in an advisory capacity to offer up suggestions, recommendations, to hear your ideas, to, you know, that may be a purpose. Some advisory boards, and I would caution using the word board, I would probably say panel or council, but some advisory panels or councils are established because they bring a set of expertise related to the programming. And you're consulting with them about your programming and how you implement your programs and how you manage your programs. So that may be a way in which you utilize an advisory panel or council. Again, they have a purpose and only you can decide what that purpose is, you know, in terms of if you decide that that's a structure you want. If you're like a YWCA, I think the expectation is that to be in that association, you have an advisory panel or you have an advisory council. Okay. Does that just to either like just use your reaction, just a thumbs up. How many of your nonprofits have an advisory panel or council? It's not often. It's not often. See, yeah, it's not often. Typically, there's a purpose for that. But again, for that president or CEO or executive director, that means you've got another entity that you've got to respond to. So I would be sure that I understood what the purpose is if I was going to set up one. And you're going to help them not to be confused about what they are and what they are not. Okay.
Question about that. Are there any foundational documents or templates around that creating a successful advisory?
Sarah, I can't understand what you're saying, Sarah. Your audio is, you may have to use the chat. Your audio is not clear. But if you put your question in the chat, we'll respond to it. Oh, templates for creating an advisory council. I can look to see if there's something that we can share. Let's see. All right, I'm making a quick note here. Hold on one second. Okay. I want to share a little bit more of what you have in your packet before we take a break and transition. So in your packet, you have a handout titled Duties of Loyalty, Care, and Obedience. Duty of loyalty, care, and obedience. So this is in your packet. This is how the Internal Revenue recognizes the duties, the fiduciary duties of a board. And that is that we are going to take care of this nonprofit, and we're going to give it the attention that it needs. We're going to be good stewards. We're going to make sure we're, lining up with the Internal Revenue and the state of North Carolina's legal expectations. And we're also going to take care of the finances of this nonprofit. In terms of duty of loyalty, we're going to avoid conflict of interest. We're not going to put our personal interests as a board member before the nonprofit organization. And then duty of obedience, we're going to uphold laws, the policies, the bylaws, the mission, and any of those other elements of being who we say we are in terms of our mission, we're going to be obedient to those as a board collectively and also as an individual board member. So I wanted you to kind of see that. Oftentimes, if a nonprofit is taken to task on a legal matter, it will come back to this. Has the board exercised duty of care, duty of loyalty, and duty of obedience? So that's a piece of information that you have in your packet. You also have a board responsibilities checklist, which comes right after that. And we've talked about much of this today already in terms of the responsibilities. The next thing you have in your packet is we talk about our board's fundraising and doing fundraising. We are going to have a session on fundraising. And so we want to make sure that we understand that it's not just about money. It is about money, but not just about money. That it is cultivating prospects whenever we can, and that it is about the business of inspiring people to address the issues and the concerns that we have as a nonprofit. And it's also about meeting the needs of the stakeholders or the constituents that we serve through our nonprofit organizations. So again, we are going to have a whole session on fundraising. So, so that's something to keep in mind, but I just want you to know what's in your packet. The next thing you have in your packet, we've been talking about this oversight and governance. Ensuring the organization is in full operation and also protecting the interest of the organization. That's what we mean when we say oversight and governance of a board. And then of course, the board of directors, job descriptions, we have those there. We talked about board members. I had you to highlight what you think of when you think about a board member. And so you have that resource there at your disposal. The vice chair role, a committee chair, secretary, treasurer, those are what we would call the officers of the board, the chair, the vice chair, committee chair, secretary, and treasurer. And then we have a separate sheet or page for the board chair. So it's page 9, I believe. So we have a separate one for that. Let's see. We have that job description, and we did the comparison, the executive director versus the board chair. Another responsibility of the board is to evaluate the president and CEO or the executive director. Now, what I find with this particular task, and that's the next page, in terms of just thinking about who hires the ED, who hires the other staff, and so on. So who hires the executive director? The board does. Typically, there's a committee or there's a body that they put together who does the searching and recruiting. If your board has a human resource committee, oftentimes they will lead this particular task for securing an ED. The executive director hires the other staff when needed. The board evaluates the performance of the ED, and the ED evaluates the performance of the staff. Let me stop here and say it's important to keep these separate. You know, you want to make sure that the board understands that their focus and attention is on governance and oversight and working with that ED president and CEO. It's not to say that you would not invite board members to be a part of a interview panel, because you might. It's not to say they can't be involved, but they're not leading it, you know, with staff. And you may have to ask board members to participate in terminating an employee, meaning staff. And then as a board, if you have to go down the path of terminating your ED, then you will, you know, definitely bring other board members in on that. So we wanted to point this out because this is where we've observed where there are challenges. This is where it can create some major conflict and chaos, really, when we don't handle this in a way that takes care of either the ED and or the staff if we reach a point of having to terminate someone. And so we've got some questions here for us as well in terms of the nonprofit. Do we feel that the governing board members fully understand the duties and responsibilities of the ED? Sometimes you have to keep reminding. How often does the chair and the ED meet other than at board meetings? Remember, if you are ED or president and CEO, it's important for you to have ongoing, consistent interaction with that board chair. Sometimes it just may be to catch up or just to enlighten them on, you know, how things are going. It may not necessarily be, and it may just be a phone call and not necessarily a formal meeting of such, but you do want to keep your board chair in the loop and informed on what's happening. And then this idea of compensation and performance, you know, how does that work for your nonprofit? And of course, that's going to be different. You can add to this sheet, you know, you can add to this sheet if you choose to. And then there's a board of directors evaluation. So as a board, we can do just what we did with the capacity assessment. We can collectively evaluate ourselves corporately by getting individual feedback from board members and compiling that, and then sharing that, and then talking about how we want to enhance or improve going forward. So we added that in as a part of your resources as well. Those are your handouts. If we could just, I'll stop there and see if there are questions, and there are 2 or 3 more things I want to share with you. So if we could go back to gallery and yeah. But I wanted to point out what you have in your packet.
I have a question, Dr. Palmer.
Yes.
So as I referred to earlier, my board members are primarily, it's all new board except for 1 person. Some have experience, some don't. We have 3 committees. And I'm new to the organization, and I feel the need to establish relationships. Do you think it would be a mistake or a good thing, because I know everyone's time is so important and limited, to ask for say a once a month virtual lunch, informal, with the board chair and committee chairs together? Or do you advise to do the board chair, because the board chair is also a committee chair. So I hate to waste too much time. Do you think it's okay to ask all 3 at the same time?
I think that is a very good strategy. And as recent as yesterday, I made that very recommendation to a nonprofit. that, you know, they wanted to do some board development work. And so what I advised them to do was to start with the committee chairs and the board chair together, and then kind of build out from there. Because, you know, our board members are talented, they're skilled, they have expertise. You know, some of them are leading organizations themselves. So, you know, they have a lot that they can offer. And so if we can build the capacity of those committee chairs and the board chairs, then that'll filter out to the broader group of board members. So I think that is a very good way to do it. And now, since we are utilizing virtual communication as we are, we can bring them together a little bit easier because they don't have to physically come where we are. Right. I would highly encourage that. I would highly encourage that. And for some of you who have some knowledge around high performance teams, that's how you begin to cultivate a high performance team. You hone in on those individuals that are leading significant entities of your organization, and you start building their capacity for them to then spread that. And so I think that is a very wise way to do it. Now, I know that there's some of us on this call where you're thinking to yourself, I'm not going to be able to get my committee chairs to do that. I'm not going to be able to bring them together as a group. Well, you may have to start with one-on-one. That's a little bit more work. It'll take a little bit more time, but you may have to start one-on-one, then grow to the cohort of chairs and move out that way. But it is important for the executive director to view their role as a part of their responsibility to maintain and to continue to cultivate your board on a regular basis. That is key.
And do you think a informal discussion is okay, or do you think you should have a set agenda for those meetings?
I think it varies. I think it depends on who the board member is. You know, you have some board members like me who I like agendas, but you have some other board members where, you know, a quick cup of coffee and a 30-minute conversation and they're good. So I think you have to kind of tailor it to meet that style of individual, you know, that you're interacting with.
Thank you.
Are there more questions, Rebecca? I don't know if there are more questions or not. I want to just highlight a couple more things before we take a break and go into the program design, management, and evaluation. I've got a few more things to share.
I don't see any further questions in the chat. If anyone has.
I'd like to just say one thing. In addition to encouraging EDs to reach out to individual board members, it is important that board chairs are also in constant contact, you know, with the EDs. You know, that's just going to be very important as well, to establish that as a regular as a regular activity.
I agree. I agree. Absolutely. It works both ways. It definitely does. Okay. So Rebecca, if we could go to the slide and with financial management and fundraising responsibilities.
Okay. Share my screen.
Now, I've been doing quite a bit of talking, right? A little miniature lecturettes for this first half of today. That's not going to happen for the second half of our time together. We're gonna be working on some things, some hands-on, and that paper that I asked you to get, I haven't forgotten that I asked you to get that. So how many of you brought back colored markers or pens or pencils? Just do a thumbs up. I just want to see. Look at Julie's cup. And is that Jill? I see Jane. Okay. All right. Okay. So if we could go back to that slide with the financial management and fundraising responsibilities.
That one. Can you see this?
I don't see it yet. Okay, there we go. Okay. There we go. So right here, I just want us to, I don't want to miss these salient points. we've been talking about all of this stuff, and this is typically how it happens. You know, we try to follow your lead in our trainings to respond to your questions and the like, but we do have a framework and we do have, you know, kind of map this out in our agenda. So I want to talk about financial management and the responsibility of the board as it relates to that. I've already spoken to fundraising some. We've talked about the board of directors ED, board chair ED, evaluating the board in ED. So I want to go back to the financial management. And the way we want to do this, we do have a session on financial management, but I want us to just kind of eyeball these different documents just as a reminder. I know that we're probably all to some degree familiar, but during our board meetings, we should be sharing financial reports with our board members. And those should occur during the board meetings. So if I could get Rebecca to just kind of share some sample financial reports for us. That one is the budget. There is
Let me find the one that I downloaded and share.
Okay,
that.
great. So while Rebecca is doing that, so what typically what you see in terms of financial reports is you'll see a profit and loss. Sometimes that's what your nonprofit can share. You might show what we call a functional expenses report. You know, so your board can see all of the expenses kind of laid out and what that looks like for that month or however often it is you meet or how you want to report. Also, there is a financial report called the financial position. Some might refer to that as the balance sheet of a nonprofit. And we're going to go over all of these documents. And so that one is, yeah, here we go.
Is this going to work?
That's your budget template. I'll go here.
Okay.
But there was, if we don't do it here, we'll do it in the financial management one.
Okay.
But so here is a sample of a budget. And typically the board of directors will vote on a budget for the next year. A lot of us, our nonprofits, the fiscal year begins July 1, ends June 30, but begins July 1, or you may be on a different cycle, and that's okay. But typically in that budget, you're going to see the revenue, proposed revenue. You're going to see proposed expenses, but you're also going to see what the current budget is for that year and do some comparison. Now, typically, if you have a finance committee or you have a treasurer of the board, typically they're going to give this report. The executive director helps to create it, but typically they're the ones that are going to report out on this. So this isn't just an example. This is just one. You know, there are other examples, and we're going to dig deeper into this in our financial management session. But I just want to just kind of highlight the point that during your board meetings and when you're interacting with your board, you should be sharing with them on a regular basis your financial reports. Each nonprofit reports out differently on finances, but it should be shared. And don't be afraid to share bad news when it comes to the financial reports. We're here your board is there to help you. And if you are a board member on this call or a board chair on this call, your executive director, your president, CEO is a part of the team. You're working together. So sometimes it's great news when we're doing budgeting and listening to financial reports, and sometimes it's challenging news. And then the annual report. The board is involved in the annual report. So Rebecca, if you could share our sample of that. And then I promise you, we're going to take a break. But I want to finish this topic. So I've asked Rebecca to share the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits annual report. Some of your nonprofits do this just like clockwork. Some of your nonprofits, you may not be geared up to do this quite yet, but we typically expect the nonprofit to do an annual report every year. It depends on your budget as to what the annual report looks like. And so you're highlighting, what has transpired financially over that year. And then oftentimes there is information about programming and impact and outcomes and the like. So, so if you could go to, Rebecca, the page that has the breakdown from the financial standpoint. Right here, it's coming up. There we go. I don't know if you can make that bigger or not, but this is accessible on the website, right?
Yes, it is.
The NC Center website.
Yeah.
So you can see, move it up just a little bit. You can see the numbers. You can see kind of the work, the outputs, the deliverables there. But you can also see here the income for that particular year and the expenses for the year. So in the annual report, we typically share the financial picture. And it's all encompassing. Typically it takes up maybe 1 or 2 pages, but that's about it because you're getting, a broader view here. So financial reports, profit and loss, balance sheet, functional expenses, those are the types of documents you would be reviewing. And then of course, the annual report. We will come back to this and we will go in depth with that. And then the last thing I want to show is I noticed that a lot of us indicated in the assessment of our capacity, this focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion. We have a principle, equity, diversity, and inclusion principle in our principles and practices guide. I would suggest that you reference that in terms of being able to think out a little bit more how you want to enhance your capacity in that area. It's on page 9 of the principles and practices guide. So, so that's some information that you can reference. And Rebecca is gonna pull this up so that we can see it also. The other thing to think about with board governance, there is so much information available about board governance and and board development. The key is we have to work out what the plan would be for your nonprofit to enhance its board or to engage in board development. So here is the page in your principles and practices guide. The different practices in terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And this is one of our principles. And we do have resources on our site too related to this particular principle. But I just wanted you to just kind of see it so that you'll know where to reference it. Another task for the board is composition and strategic planning. So if we could go to the composition. And I think for this particular handout, Rebecca is going to be showing you, this is not an item that's in your packet. This is a visual image. The composition and after that, Rebecca's strategic planning is what we're going to look at.
You want me to share that handout or are we going back to the slideshow?
You're going back to the CBR, the composition. It would be on, it's on one of our slides. So that might be, it is the board composition. It's in the curriculum, Rebecca.
Okay.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Here we go.
Yeah.
This one?
So, yeah, pretty general in terms of thinking about composition. I can't remember who asked. Someone asked about if we were going to talk about that. Your bylaws is the starting point for the composition of your board. Your bylaws inform you on the structure of your board. The composition of the board is based on demographics and characteristics that you want in a board of directors as a collective body. And so it's important to think about when you're doing your strategic plan, it's important for you to think about what composition of a board is it going to take in order for you to implement this strategic plan you've developed. Because if you're going to need certain skill sets and expertise from your board, then your recruitment of your board and what you have in your plan, there should be a comparing and contrasting of that to make sure. So your board should be diverse. We've talked about that. We've talked about equity. We've talked about diversity, inclusion. Some boards are, I heard someone say they had 40 people on their board, 50 people on a board. I chair a board right now that has 2 governing bodies. The board is about 15 people, and the other governing entity, which is more like an advisory group, is about 50 organizations or 50 members. So it does vary as to what the purpose and mission is of your nonprofit. That does vary. So that's important to think about. The board is involved in the strategic planning. I think, Rebecca, that's an image above this one. The strategic plan. So the board helps to facilitate that process whenever you're engaging in that process. It does help to do that. And then the last thing, and I'm going to take questions after this, is the legal compliance checklist. This is a resource that the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits has had available for years. And it helps us to kind of just look at the different elements of legality, right? So that we're focused on the legal expectations of those things that we need to make sure that are in check such that we remain compliant. So it is a checklist. It's a very easy read. It highlights everything from when you start the nonprofit and the application process, all the way up to you having a nonprofit that is in full operation and engaged in doing its work. So yeah. Rebecca, I'll let you respond to the wraparound that we do after every session.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. So I've written notes of things that we want to include in the wraparound, and one of them will be a link to this resource. So you all can investigate whether that's something you want to download. Members can download it for free. And I believe it's a $25 charge for non-members. But it is updated regularly, and it is yearly, and it's a great tool for you to use to make sure that you're in compliance. It sort of takes the guesswork out of it and having to figure out all the things you have to do to stay in compliance.
Yeah.
So, and then we did have, sorry, Dr. Farmer, we did have a question from Anne asking if we could set up a poll about the frequency of board meetings. So during the break, I'll go ahead and I'll add that as a poll. So when we come back, we can have folks respond to that and get a good sense. Okay. Yep.
All right. That sounds good. So if we could go back to gallery view, I just want to kind of do kind of a wrap up of this board governance. So this is the takeaway in terms of framing. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of different directions we can go in to do training around board governance. We typically like to pose the question at the beginning and begin to answer questions and then share with you what's in your packet so you know what to reference and where that information is. But the starting point for board governance is the bylaws. And I do believe that is, you all should have your own bylaws. And in the bylaws, you're going to have term limits of your board members. You're going to have the structure of the officers of the board. You're going to have information about the board meetings and when you meet and how often you meet. So your bylaws, that's what they are. They are the laws that govern in policy, that govern the activity and movement of your board of directors. So I would say start there. And then in reviewing your bylaws, if you have questions, we've got more sessions together, right? So if in the process that you're reviewing your bylaws during our institute, bring those questions back and I'll do my best to answer them for you if there's something in your bylaws that you don't understand. But that is where governance begins and ends in some cases. You can amend bylaws. You know, some of your organizations are over 100 years old. Let's hope we've amended bylaws, right? So you can amend bylaws anytime that you need to. Now, it's not the most fun task to have to review bylaws and modify them and edit them, but it is something you should do on a regular basis, to have your board review them, make changes and adjustments as you need to. And then you can modify based on the growth and development of your nonprofit. So that's that piece of it. And then of course, like I said, we've tried to include in your handout packet, you know, information that you can quickly reference and that it can kind of spark or begin to help you think about how you want to modify or make some changes around governance and oversight by way of board development. And then there's a lot of different ways and directions to go there too. So I'm going to stop talking to just kind of see if there are any questions on board governance before we switch to our next topic and before we take our break. I know that that is quite a bit of information, but we wanted to make sure that we included those salient areas in particular that we get lots of questions about, but also to try to respond to your questions that you have today. So I'll let you all talk to me for just a few minutes and pose any questions in that regard. I think there's some questions in the chat too. And we apologize if we can't keep up with the questions in the chat. We're doing our best to make sure we don't miss you, but you can unmute and go ahead and insert yourself and share if we miss you, okay?
We did have a question from Laura, or any guidance for communication partnership between regular staff members, not executive directors, and the board?
I actually think, I think United Way does this, or at least they have in years past, where they will have key staff report out at the board meetings. So it's not just the executive director and it's not just the board chair. Not just the executive director who's speaking out about what's happening in the organization. Now, it depends on the leadership style and the management style of that ED. I know that there are some executive directors, they prefer to do that. But that is a strategy that you can use to let, you know, your staff do the report outs. Then they can exit the meeting. They don't have to stay the whole time, but they can, you know, give updates on different programs, and that kind of opens the door. I do think it's important for board members to understand that they don't supervise the staff, that the ED does. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, while they might reach out to a staff person, I think you just have to establish on both sides what the protocol is for that. But yeah.
Agreed. A question from Jill. Do you recommend opening board meetings to all staff?
Not necessarily all staff. I think, now some of you are the staff. I do get that. Like, there is no one but you. I get that. But then for those of you who have like a management team, or you have directors in place in different roles, I think you have to be, I think it needs to have a purpose. So if your staff is going to be a part of board meetings, it should be purposeful in terms of why you have them engaged in that way. I'll tell you, as a board member, it is very, I like seeing staff every now and then at a board meeting so that we can put names and faces together, because we don't see those individuals every day. So I think it's helpful, and maybe they have a task that they're performing at the board meeting, so that there's purpose there. Board governance. Any other?
Just a comment from Sarah. I'm on a board of directors and the staff are extremely interested in being present at the meetings, and it doesn't always seem appropriate.
Yeah, I do think you have to manage that. You know, it's not, I think they have to have purpose. Yeah. Sean, I get that. That makes sense. Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Excellent.
Okay, so right now you're thinking what about board governance before we take our break? Right now you're thinking, because we're going to transition to a whole new topic when we come back. What right now you're thinking what? Give us a little bit of insight as to your takeaway. I see hope from Monica in the chat. Okay, good.
Good.
See.
Nice. Yeah, that investment of time, it's relationship building, and relationship building takes time and effort. But it's a worthy investment of that time. I also think I've been a part of organizations that at least once a year they have they do social time with board members in addition to the meeting. So to kind of celebrate a good year, perhaps. It was typically at a board member's house. So it was sort of, it felt a little different than what they're normally used to sitting around the table. And these days with COVID, they're all Zooming in, right? But once we're past this, I think it's a good way to really build that camaraderie and have them get to know one another personally. And it meant all the world in terms of the board's connection to each other and staff members that attended that event as well. I found that to be really, really helpful. So thinking about that more intentionally, that you have some time for them to connect socially and to get to know one another outside of meetings. Very nice. Good overview, accountability.
Okay, yeah.
Terrific.
Okay, all right. So we are at 11:38. So let's return at 11:50. I think, is that good, Rebecca? I think that's good. When you return, bring that paper that you had and also your tools that you gathered, and we'll be all hands on deck when we come back. So it will be a little different structure than this style that we've had or this approach that we've used for board governance. Okay.
Great. And I'll go ahead and I'll get that poll in there for us to start off with when we get back regarding the frequency of board meetings. All right, we'll see you back here at 11:50. Record. There we go. So welcome back. These are our poll results. The frequency of board meetings, we've got about 53% meet monthly, 18% every other month, and 24% quarterly, and 6% with other. I'm curious if any of you would like to share what that frequency is if you list it as other. Feel free to unmute yourself and share.
Our board meets 5 times a year, so we're somewhere between quarterly and monthly.
Great. I was nervous. I thought you were going to say that you meet annually.
Oh, no. Mm-mm.
I was like, don't say that. That's great. All right. Go ahead and stop sharing that and we can continue on.
Okay. Well, welcome back. And thank you all for, again, being here. We are going to move into our topic of program design, management, and evaluation. And what I would like for you to do to get us going in terms of learning about these three different areas of programming is if you could grab one sheet of that paper that I asked you to get, and whatever writing utensils you're going to use. I know some of you have interesting tools in your toolbox as far as the work that you do, and if you just have a pencil and a pen, that works as well. So what I want you to do for me for the next 5 minutes, so it's 11:53, is I would like for you to give me an illustration of one program at your nonprofit, meaning a program that delivers services. Now, if you are a foundation, you may not have a program that you actually deliver, but you may have a program that you fund. So you would use a program that you fund. And I want you to draw me a picture of what happens in that program. So fill up your page. You know, if I showed up to see that program in action, what would I see? So give me a illustration of that. What would I see? And I think Rebecca might be trying to do some music for us while we do that. So I'll hand it off to her.
Yep, I have pulled up for us a little Tuesday jazz session on the YouTube. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and get that rolling. And how many minutes did you say again, Dr. Palmer? 5?
We're going to, let's see, it's 11:50. Let's go to 12 o'clock.
Okay.
So you're going to give me a visual image. And if you have questions, just put it in the chat and Rebecca and I will pay attention to that, you know, and answer questions as you work on this. So give me the full picture. If I were to show up and see this program in action, what would I see? again, in your picture, give us every aspect of the program. You know, what would we see? What would be happening if I showed up to see this program in action? We have about 1 more minute, give or take. So
All right. Hope y'all enjoyed that. As you're wrapping up your representations of this task, we're excited to see. I'm going to stop sharing because I think we're going to do gallery view, right, Dr. Palmer?
yes,
Okay.
thank you. Yeah. So if I could get you to hold up your picture like this so I can see. If I could get you to hold up your picture.
Oh, nice.
Oh, wow. Okay. Let's see. Wow. We have some artistes amongst us. We're all artists though, aren't we?
Everyone is.
Excellent, excellent. So what we're going to do next to we're going to use this image to help us to learn more about designing programs, managing the programs once we have them up and running, and evaluating programs. And so what we're going to do next is you're going to go into breakout rooms and you're going to share your picture with your group. Now, I'm not sure, Rebecca, how many groups are you going to do? You may only be able to share 2 or 3 if you have more than 2 or 3 people in a group, just for time. Okay. So we'll break out and we will come back at 12:10. Okay, we'll come back at 12:10. So the directions in the breakout is you're going to share your image. So you're going to do just like you did here. You're going to hold it up, right? And then you're going to share with your group what you have in your picture. Okay? Everybody good?
All right.
All right. I see some head nods. All right, Rebecca, take them away.
Here we go.
Breakout.
We'll give you a little warning, a 1-minute warning. We're about to close out, but we'll gather back here at 12:10. All right. We'll see you in a bit. And we're good to go. Welcome back.
Okay. I see there are a few more populating in, I think. So, I don't know. I think we're getting close though.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, great. I am hopeful that you were able to hear about some different programs in your breakout and to hear how these programs are structured or how they're implemented. We're going to move into another step in this process of understanding program design, management, and evaluation. And I'm going to have you engage in a matching exercise. So two things are going to happen here in just a second. Rebecca is going to share a document titled Program Design, Management, and Evaluation Checklist. And then she's also going to put the link in the chat. So you'll have it in both places. I want you to, of course, have your picture in front of you, your image that you illustrated. And once we get that doc up, then I will give you some more instructions.
Share my screen.
Okay. So what I would like for you to do is there are 20 items listed in this checklist. And what I would like for you to do is to match the items in the checklist with the images in your picture. So for example, if you have an image in your picture that gives some indication of the problem or issue that your program addresses, you would put a number 1 beside that. If in your picture you have an item or an image, I'm sorry, that shows social media, the use of social media, then you would put a number 13 beside that image. So you're looking at the image of your picture and you are matching the items in the checklist with the images in your picture. You have it 2 places on the screen, and also the doc is in the chat. So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to do that.
Dr. Palmer, will you please make the
Say again. I think make the image bigger. I think that might be it. Okay. I think that's what that person said. They
Yes.
went in and out. Okay.
Yes.
All right. And we can scroll that up and down if it, Rebecca, if it takes up too much space. So there we go.
Is that better?
Yeah.
A little? Okay.
Perfect. Okay. So let's take 1 more minute. So you're doing a match. You're matching the items in the checklist with the images in your picture.
And you can just put numbers, right? So
yeah, they're matching the number. Yep.
Okay.
They're matching the number. Uh-huh. And while we're finishing up on that, so we are learning about program design, management, and evaluation. In terms of program design, we are typically the design of a program aligns with the nonprofit's mission and vision to meet the needs of the community and or the needs of the constituents that the program serves. In terms of management, we manage our programs with hopefully sufficient funding and also human resources to achieve our desired outcomes. In terms of evaluation, we're working to provide credible evidence of the impact of our programs through a detailed and robust assessment and evaluation process. You will find these practices that are listed here in the Principles and Practices Guide under the Principal Program Design, Management, and Evaluation. So just if I could get in the chat, how many of these items were evident in your image? How many of these items were evident in your image? I see 4. I see 3. I see 5. How many of these items were evident in your image? I see 13. I think I saw 8. I see 8 again. So it varied. What we want to communicate here is that these are what we consider to be some fundamental aspects of designing a program, managing a program, and evaluating a program. In your packet, you have, in your handouts, you have specific handouts related to program evaluation. One thing that we have learned in doing capacity building training with nonprofits is that oftentimes it is the program evaluation area where our nonprofits are seeking more assistance and support. So in your packet, you have specific handouts around the process of the evaluation and how you prepare an evaluation, the focus of the evaluation in terms of types, and then conducting the evaluation and reporting the results. Before we move into the specifics though of those particular areas of our topic, help me to know if there is an item listed that you don't understand out of the 1 through 15. We're going to look at the other 5 more specifically in our handouts, but 1 through 15, give me an indication if there is something there that you do not understand what we are conveying. Okay. Are there any items that you were surprised that you did not have in your image? Because you all had a different set of, you identified a different number in which was reflected in your image. What are your thoughts about what was missing in your image? What are your thoughts? Mm-hmm.
My image was really strong on design, but not as much on evaluation. And that's true to form for some of our programs. So as we're thinking about outcomes and measuring the outcomes, that's actually where we are at this point. So until looking at this, I didn't realize how clear it became.
Okay. Anyone else? What are your thoughts about what you did not include?
This is Monica. I think for me, the evaluation piece, knowing that our nonprofit provides services that are effective and not having that feedback from not only program participants, but also community stakeholders, just to know, are we developing programming that meets the need of the community as well as our mission and purpose?
Thank you. So let's turn our attention to your packet, your handout packet. This is probably one of my favorite sets of handouts that we use, because it really helps us to clarify how we need to think about evaluation. So Rebecca, if you could go to that third page, preparing to evaluate, focusing the evaluation, conducting the evaluation, and reporting the results and findings. So oftentimes we do spend a lot of time looking at inputs and outputs, and we definitely have shifted over the years to outcomes and impact. And so designing your program initially, including aspects of evaluation, is important because it helps you to take care of that on the front end. What I want you to go to next, Rebecca, is the, let's see, it's page type of evaluation. It's page 7, no, 6, page 6. So we're highlighting 3 types of evaluation here. Goals-based, process-based, and outcomes-based. What I'm finding in terms of what funders want to know, they definitely want to know about outcomes and impact. But in order for us to get there, we also have to focus on goals and process. So that's how I want to kind of frame this particular handout, is that yes, outcomes and impact, ultimately our funders want to know that, our supporters want to know that, and definitely our constituents want to experience outcomes and impact. But it does take us thinking about the goals of our programs and the process or methodology that we use to implement them in order for us to get there. So we have that for you in terms of referencing that. We also added questions to support, that's the next page, questions to support the type of evaluation that you want to engage in. So that's your types of evaluation there. And then of course, once you get the data from the different entities that you use, you may get qualitative data and you may get quantitative data. So you want to think about how you're going to store that data or save it or preserve it, and then how are you going to use it? That's important to think about. Once we have collected the data, and of course there are different methods that we can use to collect the data. This is a really neat little checklist or fact sheet too, because if the purpose, let's just say, for you to get feedback about how well your program is doing, if it is for you to get responses back quickly, fairly easy, and in a non-threatening way, questionnaires, surveys, and checklists work for that. But if you want to gather more pointed, accurate information about how your program actually operates, particularly in terms of process, then your method of gathering information might be observation. So this really helps you to be able to identify, based on the purpose for which you're going to use the information, it helps the method, the type of method that you use is going to be essential in the type of information you get back. So that's important. This is one of my favorite. I know I said a second ago that the whole packet was my favorite, but this is one of my favorite sheets right here because it's real quick. You know, because you think to yourself, well, when should I use a survey, or when should I use focus groups, or, you know, what should I use to get information? It also has a lot to do with how much money you have too. It's dependent upon what method you use. You know, you might have to invest in that approach or that process. Then, of course, we've got to interpret this information. And then oftentimes we create some kind of report for the program that gives us a collection, or we compile all of the information so that we can then report out. Now, this report, the contents of this sample report that we're giving here, this is fairly comprehensive, right? So you may scale back you know, if this is not the direction you want to go in terms of what we have here. But we wanted to give you kind of an exhaustive contents of an evaluation report so you could then work your way backwards. What I would suggest is that you have a way to evaluate all your programs. And I would also suggest that you have this checklist created for all of your programs. And then when it's time to write a grant, you have all that information in one place. Or if there's a donor that wants to know more about a program, you have all that information in one place, as opposed to in, you know, kind of scattered around. So we encourage you to use this framework for that. And then lastly, you'll report out. You'll report the results and findings to your stakeholders. So you might do that in your board meetings. You might do it in staff meetings, because staff are stakeholders too. You might do some kind of forum. You might do, if you have an annual report and you're going to unveil that, you might want to incorporate some of this information in that as well. So that's our program design, management, and evaluation training in terms of thinking about program design, management, and eval. So Rebecca, if we could go back to the gallery view before we move into our closing, I always like to do a check-in. Tell me what you think, two things. What do you think about how we trained, right, if you will, on program design, management, and evaluation? And what's your takeaway from this topic for our session today? And you can unmute or you can put it in the chat, either one.
I'll start. I'd like to say that outcomes are very important. And in order to get to outcomes and impact, we've got to use goals and processes to really lead the way to answering those questions.
Any other takeaways from the program design, management, and eval?
Thank you for providing all of the supports and the resources. I definitely feel like given the time and taking the time, making the time to use those resources is going to be critical. But not going to lie, I still feel a little like, am I outside of my depth understanding that eval part? So having additional, you know, consulting support, you know, just thought partnership is going to be helpful to really nail that, to ensure that we can get to the proper outcomes.
Okay.
That's great. We also had a comment from Julie. All of her programs are evaluated differently, so they rely on a lot of outcomes eval, not much the others.
Okay.
So every program is going to be different. Every organization is going to be different, the way they track things. Good to be acknowledging of those differences and seeing maybe where there may be ways that you might want to grow or expand, try something new.
Okay. Well, I know that we are approaching our end time. If I could, our topic next week is strategic planning. So if I could get 2 volunteers to share your strategic plan next week at some point during our session. If I could get 2 volunteers to share your strategic plan. And I know some of us may not have one, but for those of you who do, can we get 2 volunteers that would be interested in sharing? I see Thomas Ray is saying he will do that, Rebecca. So if we can make a note of that.
I'm making note. Thanks, Thomas.
And we need 1 more volunteer that'll do a show and tell for us.
I'm happy to do it.
Arlene.
Okay.
Great.
Oh yeah, I don't mind guinea pigging this one because from a young nonprofit professional's perspective, any feedback and coaching from all of you who are seasoned, I mean, I've got a captive audience, why not?
Okay, so we will hear from Thomas and Arlene next week. And if you all could have those ready, I guess Rebecca, in a PDF form of some sort that they can share their screen next week, or however they do it.
Yeah, we'll probably give you authority to go ahead and share your screen, and then that way you can just have it pulled up. We'll do that towards the beginning, Dr. Palmer.
Yes, yes.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Great.
And that concludes my facilitation today. I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca. Thank you all for
Yay.
joining us.
Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you, Dr. Palmer. Real quick, I did put the survey link in the chat. If you want to go ahead and click on that and complete your eval right now before you log off. Otherwise, it'll be in the wraparound email that we like to have out by close of business or end of day Thursday. And all the links to PDFs that we provided, session recording, handouts for next week, and this eval link will be in there for you all. So I'll pass it off to Jean to say our final closing, and we'll see you all a week from today.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you, Dr. Palmer. Oh my goodness, what a jam-packed session. My head is full. And I just want to say thank you for giving us so much information. Go to our website as well and look at what the resources are. Thank you all for participating. As nonprofit professionals, we always appreciate you wanting to do your job better, and we appreciate the opportunity to help you with that. So we'll see you next week, and thank you again.
Bye, y'all. Take care. Thank you. Bye.